Yeah, so we actually expect FDA clearance in either the end of Q4 or the beginning of Q1 2013 for our prescription product.
And what process are you being required to go through, by the way? Which of the FDA process?
Well, we're class 2 medical device, so we are ECG, single lead ECG, and we're basically, there are predicate devices, so we walk like a duck, we talk like a duck, we quack like a duck. We transmit our data very differently, but essentially that. So we expect clearance at the end of Q4 or the beginning of Q1. And it's interesting, the go-to-market strategy. We had been approached by a number of traditional medical distributors, and then when they heard our pricing for our product, realized that they really couldn't make the kind of margins they're interested in. So we really are looking at kind of more of a strategy of using key opinion leaders and very kind of well-recognized clinical research to drive adoption in the cardiologist and general practitioner, and then with patient and consumers, much more kind of classic kinds of viral marketing, user stories, really kind of word-of-mouth adoption, and obviously using traditional channels like Best Buy or Apple. We also have a device that will be coming out at the end of Q2, which will be a universal pad or screening device, so you can imagine that being placed almost anywhere, and someone could use that, get a screen, and then be able to, based on that interpretation. The interesting thing back to privacy, which is a little bit of a flip, but one of the ironical things about the FDA that's, then this whole idea of pushing out, you owning your own health record and having empowerment over your health is the FDA for our over-the-counter submission or an over-the-counter ECG will not let the consumer see the actual waveform. They don't think that the patient or the consumer is prepared yet for being able to see that. So you would be able, have to somehow. We've got lots of really interesting ways of being able to show you the relevant information, but there is this little bit of this sort of interesting, yeah.
So just from your FDA standpoint, you're a non-invasive device, and how long from start to finish would you expect your process to be?
We expect it to be 90 days.
And can you give us a ballpark of your pricing?
Well, we actually haven't announced pricing for the human side yet, the vet side or the animal side. Which, by the way, one of the questions we just received, so we have been out in the market at a price of $199 in the vet side, and one of the questions we received through our customer service the other day was whether we worked on cockatoos or macaws, and even more importantly, whether we worked on their eggs.
So I gotta ask then, so for the vet side, can the animal see the waveform? Or they're not, the FDA's not involved?
Fido can see it.
So I could technically go and buy it for Fido and use it on myself, perhaps?
Well, we haven't.
You wouldn't advocate that?
We would not only not advocate that, but we're really targeted at the veterinarian right now.
I have a question about, right here. So you guys mentioned basically having these patient portals, and the patients will go perhaps enter data, and so this data is going to be stored in some format, and there's going to be some metadata that you guys will be designing and figuring out, what data to store. And I would imagine that each of you are going to have a different data that you might be storing or care about, etc. Going forward, when we want to have this ability to communicate, to share our patient data between one practice and another practice, right? Or one provider, let's say Intuit, and then what's your company name again? Sorry, Practice Fusion, right? So the data will be in different formats. Is there any work towards developing a standard in terms of what data is stored, so that going forward sharing can become easier?
So that standard is the continuity of care document. That document describes, it's XML based, it specifically describes the types of things you're supposed to transmit, and that's a subset of what most EMRs track. It governs the coding that you use to describe the diagnoses, procedures, immunizations, allergies, medications, advanced directives. All the codification of that is prescribed in the document description, and there are specific places in the document where it's supposed to be. So that's how we're going to be able to communicate with each other. There is room in the market for more, though. I think that's sort of a low bar that's been set. And so there's tons of room to innovate on top of that, imploring companies that are managing a lot of these communication pathways to increase the volume and breadth and depth of the data that they're transmitting. I think that's a conversation that can still be had. There's plenty of room to create companies around this kind of thing. I mean, communication between systems is not a new thing, but convincing companies to take that extra step of integration and make it happen, that's the novel thing that's happening right now that the federal government is mandating. I don't know, Rick may have a better way of saying that.
No, I think that's well put. And we today, for example, we receive CCDs from multiple different EHR companies. And it's not just plug and play yet. It's getting better. And I have business analysts on my team that are, on a daily basis cursing with the business analysts, not really cursing, but as soon as they hang up the phone, they're saying, well, they're not interpreting the CCD spec the right way. And there are work groups that are working on it, but it's getting, the first time we did it a year ago, it was a nightmare. Now doing it is much more straightforward. But I guarantee you, if we tried to exchange CCDs and parse it into discrete data, it wouldn't just work out of the box. But I think 6 months from, it wouldn't take a long time to debug it. And 6 months from now, a year from now, it would get a lot easier. And so my point in bringing up CCDs early on is I think it's a key building block that enables a lot of things going forward and startups going forward.
Yeah, before HHS, the Office of National Coordinator within HHS, before they put their foot down and said we're going to use CCDs, there were hundreds of different standards. There was proprietary standards at the wazoo. There was a CCR, which is a continuity of care record, that was competing with the continuity of care document, and because they shared two of the same words, it was super confusing. The market and the big players in the market, the Epics, the Allscripts, the Athena Healths,
The practice fusions.
well, we weren't in existence yet, but the eClinical Works, they really did the patients and providers themselves a real disservice because they didn't settle on something together. And now they are paying the consequences, and we all benefit because it's now been commoditized, and it's very simple, it's very straightforward. Not as simple as it should be, and we'll get there. Soon it'll be very you drop a file in a folder, and it picks it up, and it shows you exactly what you're supposed to see. Is there a microphone?
So maybe I'm missing something, but in meaningful use, the first stage, there are very clear mandates about the CCD, CCR, and which version should it be. And it is very easy to send a document, you went through the certification.
Yeah.
So it's the tools are very clear, the language is very clear, so why is it so difficult? I'm missing something here.
The devil's in the details.
I've been through that because I went through certification, and the version that they want now is one version. They're not giving you the alternatives of several different versions like you had before. So with the HL7 in the XML format, the version is very, very clearly defined. So what is it that you're having trouble with talking with other?
Gosh, I don't even know where to start.
Let's start from the beginning.
Well, first of all, there's a disconnect between EMR companies becoming certified, and then doctors using those certified EMRs in a meaningful way. For doctors for us to get certified, we had to reach a very minimum bar of certification. So we proved to the certification body that we could encode one patient's medical history, and they verified that it matched their spec. So we did it once, and their expectation was that it was going to work for 305 million Americans. So that was already a little bit folly. So part of it has to do with the way that certification was granted to a bunch of EMR companies. They didn't go to the deep level of, what do you do in this particular case when the patient has been diagnosed with something that doesn't have an ICD-9 code yet? Or what if the EMR company is on the SNOMED standard and they don't use ICD-9 to track diagnoses anymore? Do you rely on a mapping for that the other EMR company may not know about? So there's just a lot of devil in that detail. Now, for a doctor to get their money from the federal government, they don't have to use the CCR or they don't have to use the CCD functionality at all. That's one of the menu items, and we're getting wonky again, but there's no requirement in stage 1 that doctors do anything with the patient's CCD. In stage 2, they're required to give patients the ability to view, download, transmit their CCD, and they have to do that for 50% of their patients. And it has to be available to that patient within 4 days. Now, it's a little silly to me, working in a web-based environment, to have to wait 4 days to be able to download something, but they did that for the legacy vendors, and I completely support it because they need that lead time to be able to move a ton of data around. The other interesting part of stage 2 is that for doctors to get their money back from the federal government, patients, 10% of their patients have to do that, have to attempt to download, view, and transmit their own information. That part's a little strange to me, and we'll see how it shakes out. The stage 2 ruling just came out a couple weeks ago, so people are talking a lot about, okay, so a doctor won't get paid unless their patients go and do something. How is a doctor going to force their patient to do something? Are they going to send them some sort of incentive scheme to make it happen? We'll see what happens there. I think that 50% number is way too low, though. You know, we should be much higher. Doctors should be required to share, give patients access to their information within 24 hours and for all their patients, but we'll get there. That may not have quite answered your question. The easiest way I can answer it is to say the devil's in the details.
Yeah, I mean, we could go wonky and get into all kinds of use cases, and you weren't required to make it available to patients, as Matthew said. So a lot of those use cases didn't exist in stage 1.
It was a really low bar.
My question is for Matt. I'd like to become your 11th paid customer, but my question is, are you planning at any time to open your APIs to allow other startups to tie into your system and obviously utilize it for all the benefits it provides? We've talked to some of your tech people that are excellent, but it didn't sound like that was anywhere on the radar.
Well, we're keeping some of that tight to our chest, close to our chest. But we do currently have, first of all, we don't think of ourselves as just an electronic medical record and a personal health record anymore. We are a healthcare platform that happens to have an EMR at this, as the foundation of our system. We have deployed APIs already, specifically for labs to connect to us. The standard model that other EMRs have taken is that to integrate with the 2,500 labs around the country, the EMR company needs to code to that lab standard. So a company like Athena Health has an army of 50 engineers who all they do is integrate with labs. We took the more internet approach, the platform API approach, where and we were only able to do this after we had a certain number of doctors. So now we have the leverage in the market that labs, to stay in business, have to do business with us. So we can mandate to them that they conform to our standard and they code to us. We're going to do the same thing in exposing APIs for devices, for mobile applications. In the case of Judy's product, it's both. It's both web. It's a mobile app and a medical device. Just like when you're syndicating your status update to Facebook through another application, you have to authorize that application to post a status update on your behalf. It's this pretty common standard called OAuth. We're working on implementing something similar to what Intuit has, which is an app, sort of an app store. We're going to have a device and app store directly within the product, so at the end of the visit, the doctor's prescribing medications, nutrition plan, and some sort of physical therapy. We're also going to allow them to prescribe apps and devices. And we're going to allow people to post and live in our app store for free. The only thing we ask for in return is they must syndicate that data back to our central repository. In the case of your heart rate or an EKG, that information is going to their cloud. If a patient authorizes their application, it would also post to the Practice Fusion cloud and instantly be available to the physician to access it, which is the most important thing in my opinion. The doctor doesn't have that information to be able to take action on it. It's kind of living on its own, and it's not being looked at. It's siloed away, and that's kind of the problem that we have right now. And it also appears in the personal health record, so the patient has access to it. And, access and data is key. So I guess that was my long answer. The short answer is yes, we will be deploying APIs to enable all kinds of connectivity, scheduling, documents, transcription services, billing, connectivity. But the one I'm spearheading and most interested in is device and mobile applications.
Just to clarify on ours, because that's exactly the kind of thing we'd be wanting to allow patients to do. With our product, that patients can still do that. Our patient actually even today can either notify a healthcare professional and provide permission to them to access that ECG. They can forward it to a medical professional. They can email it. So within our our kind of product between the mobile and the web, you'll be able to provide access to your ECGs and your information, and for the doctor also to provide it back to you. But we would also be looking to integrate with like Practice Fusion in terms of using their APIs, so that, again, because I think we all have the vision of the patient being the one that's empowered with that data and that information, however they choose to store it.
And we would, in essence, be providing a new marketing platform for companies like Judy's.
Yeah, I have a question for Judy. Could you give us a little idea of the sort of, as an entrepreneur, the startup challenges to sort of build out a new medical device company, and these kinds of challenges that are not very apparent, like, do you spend most of your money not on R&D of the product, but on getting certification and getting opinion leaders to come on your side? And the whole doctor community is very insular, egotistical, they have their own cliques. And so, just one side may promote you and another side may not. And how do you deal with sort of the realities of really building out a business and then scaling it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question on a number of dimensions. One of which is one of our board members comes not from the medical background and was, sort of talking about how we set up a whole sort of pre-sales and gone out and kind of locked in sales for this product, and I thought, only if I want to be arrested, obviously since we're not cleared yet by the FDA. So one, there's just a cost of infrastructure in terms of things like master control, which controls your documentation. There's all the FDA regulatory stuff that you have to wrap around a software development process, and the fact that ours is both on the app and on the web. Even for us, the fact that every time we want to update the app, what if that actually has to go back through the FDA versus a note to file? So the whole time in terms of the process, the incremental cost is challenging, although we've decided to embrace it and actually make it it's a competitive barrier, because we are a Class 2 medical device, and it's actually, if we do it well. And same on the privacy things. One thing, this is obviously a US audience, but our product, because I was just in Africa in October, and I was in literally the northeast corner of Botswana, and there was nothing there. No toilets, no running water, no electricity, nothing. And I had a 3G signal on my phone. I was actually accidentally downloading, I forgot to put data roaming off, so it's likely pretty built to deal with later. But so you can imagine a device like ours actually being able to be used anywhere in the world, and so then you talk about EU privacy requirements, and you could really tear your hair out. So it's a significant cost. An interesting thing that's even the more of the cost here in the US is under a fee-for-service model. We have heard from a number of prominent cardiologists say, how am I going to get paid for this? Whereas you go to the UK, where they're a very different model, and they're their own business person, and they're like, this is great, this is actually going to save me time and money, so I'll buy it tomorrow, which you wouldn't think when you think of sort of the NHS system. So we've actually found that probably the bigger barrier for us as a business and for startups is actually how to, in a fairly, sometimes, I don't want to use the word perverse, so I won't, but slightly tortured system of fee-for-service, that products that I think, not just ours, but many products that can have quite a significant impact on care take much longer for adoption, because the economic benefit and the health benefit aren't necessarily aligned as they should be.
I have a question for Matt. What are the opportunities for a system integrator company implementing Practice Fusion?
Can you say that just a little bit? Just hold it a little bit closer. I think that's
okay. So, what are the opportunities for a system integrator company implementing Practice Fusion? Because a lot of opportunities that I see there, especially. What are the basic qualifications you look for?
when you say implement, like integrate. So when we have our APIs that we're working on to market, we're going to be fairly democratic about it. Anyone who wants to integrate with our platform is going to be able to. It won't be quite as easy as signing up for like an Apple developer account. We will require specific contracts that protect both us and the integration company from a HIPAA standpoint, from an HHS oversight standpoint. Healthcare is the most highly regulated industry in the US under the regulatory umbrella of about 18 different agencies. So there are some additional things we have to protect. Even with Apple, when they're listing products like Ogamatrix for blood glucose tracking, and if they start regulating some of the other healthcare apps that are on there, even Apple requires additional documentation. I guess Judy's dealt with some of that stuff. It's a new market to them. It's a new concept to them, which makes things go a little bit slower. But for the most part, we're not going to set too high of a threshold to integrate with our back end. There's going to be some governor limits on how often you can post to our endpoints, similar to the governor limits that Twitter and Facebook put in place, so they don't get inundated. We have to make sure that we separate our systems out well, so that one misbehaving integration can't take all the other ones down with it. So that's where a lot of the technology problem comes into play. But that's also some of the fun stuff. That's where you really can differentiate yourself and ensure that it's going to scale to millions. Did I answer your question? Sort of. Okay, I'll take 80%.
So I had a question. Maybe all three of you can address it, but you're in a position to collect a lot of data, right? Are you planning to anonymize the data and make it available, Twitter, for
what?
So that people can innovate and do interesting things with it?
I'll go first. No. Seriously though, we're not in the data business. We are going to allow people to build applications that leverage that data, but in a walled garden or in a curated museum way. So in using the term, we're going to allow providers to prescribe an app. First, the provider is going to decide whether they even want an app in their portal at all, and then they can prescribe it to specific patients. So we see them, they're our economic buyer, we see them as the trusted entity, so they're really in control of this going forward, and we don't have any plans to monetize the data or make it available.
So yes, we do. So we actually are, actually have statisticians giving us sort of the, housekeeping seal of approval on de-identifying data, and we expect that actually one of the bigger long-term impacts we can have both through our heart monitoring, which won't be just ECG, but the other things we can do with the wireless communication protocol and licensing deals, that we will have incredibly rich data that should be available for clinical research and to provide kind of new algorithms and new, both from a predictive perspective as well as actually ongoing research. And so we actually know walled gardens, and we're trying to make that global as well. I mean, there's already 7 clinical trials that are going on with just the data we have from our clinical trials on everything from being able to dynamically alter your prescription if you're on blood thinning medicine, through to pediatric heart issues through to predictions around congestive heart failure, and we actually see that's one of the real powers of things like, I mean, we even imagine being able to engage consumers in getting them involved in those clinical trials, so being able to push out a message that says a study's going on about caffeine and heart impact on the heart. You know, take your ECG and, you know, and let us know, and being able to actually show consumers where their data, if they want, is being used in clinical trials. So we actually see that longer term, one of the most important parts of what we're doing, which is helping provide for better care longer term with that data. But again, in a very de-identified, completely HIPAA EU privacy compliant way. But
Yeah, the answer is very much yes, and primarily because we see that as one of our core responsibilities to our providers and to our patients, that we have all this data, clinical information on about 12 million patients in our system that is hugely statistically significant across many diagnoses and medication therapies. The amazing things that could be found in data sets like this are, you know, really invaluable to all of humanity. I don't think I'm overstating that by saying it that way. So we actually see it as one of our core responsibilities, and directly in line with that, with the responsibility of unlocking this data and making it available for research, is our other responsibility, which is to protect the identity of the people that are living in those data sets. HIPAA, we'll get wonky again here real quick, provides for safe harbor provisions explicitly in the law that allow companies that have access to this data, if you follow those 18 de-identification rules that qualify you for safe harbor, then you can do almost anything within reasonable limits with that data. We have already provided up to 100,000 de-identified, completely anonymized patient records to some universities around the country, including Johns Hopkins and Harvard, University of Washington, Seattle, that are using that data to test some of their theories. So we see it as one of the core responsibilities that we have in having access to all this clinical data. And it's very clear to our doctors when they sign up that that's the case as well. Before that was part of our explicit license agreement, we decided we were going to announce the fact that we were teaming with a bunch of institutions to do research. We decided to announce it at one of our user conferences. And when my co-founder Ryan got up on stage and announced it to our user community, there were 1,500 of them in the room, it was met with just raucous applause, because they know how important that is too.
So is that free or is that
Right now it's free to the institutions that we've exposed to. We also have a few data challenges going on. There's a data challenge on Kaggle right now. We're the first healthcare challenge that they're running, and participants in that challenge, the developers themselves, can actually make $10,000 if they win the competition. So for the publicly available things like that, we will not be charging.
We'll keep it to a couple more questions so that we can leave some time for networking after the event is over. Volunteers need to wrap up by 9 o'clock.
With ICD9 to ICD10 migration, does it really impact your platform, your business, and what it really takes for you to move to ICD10?
Probably, yeah.
It's going to impact Matthew a lot more than me. I mean, we're designed for ICD10, and we're actually already receiving some data there. But I think you've got.
Yeah. So for the last decade, or 8 years, I guess, we've been on this ICD-9 code structure. ICD-9, I think, stands for International Classification of Disease, or something similar to that. The 9 represents as the 9th version of the standard. Europe has implemented ICD-10. They did 3 or 4 years ago. In the States, it's been a bit more of a challenge because the hospital chief information and chief medical information officers pushed back pretty hard on Medicare and Medicaid for making that a standard within the way that claims are filed. They even got another year extension earlier this year when HHS said we're not going to do it yet. I think that they've set the drop dead date as October 2013 or something. I haven't kept up on that part of the policy, but because there's a lot. But the core way that we will migrate from ICD-9 to ICD-10 is actually pretty straightforward. Because we are a web-based system centralized in a single place with one database that manages this kind of lookup, we can upgrade our system overnight, and the next day doctors won't even know that it's been changed, except the way they used to look up diabetes. If they looked up by the 250 code, they'll have to look it up by a different code. So it's incumbent upon us to make it easy to still find the diagnoses that they were used to looking up. SNOMED is really the way that things will be codified in the future, though. SNOMED CT covers symptoms, it covers diagnoses, it covers some medications. I think that will become more the standard of communication around diagnoses. And there's also a conversion from ICD-9 to ICD-10 that a group in New Zealand put together that will aid a lot of the EMR companies in converting everything over.
But in your case, won't you see more challenges when integrating with the downstream systems, and there might be different time periods and which when they adapt to ICD-10 or not?
Most of the documents or most of the standards that are downstream from an EMR provide for supporting both at the same time. So if a patient's record has a mix of ICD-9 and ICD-10, the codification standard accepts both and accommodates both. That's actually part of the devil in the details. When you have different systems coding different ways, the other systems might not be able to speak that specific language. The goal with ICD-10 and SNOMED is to increase the number of things that can be tracked in the most granular way possible, and hopefully serve that as a standard that is in place forever. We shouldn't have to move to a new standard anytime within the next couple decades.
So, one last question, I guess. Both Rick and Matt, you talked about that your products are more focused towards the provider, while Judy is pitching towards the consumer. Now, in your cases, if a patient moves from a doctor, or in case the patient has his data anonymized, who owns the record? Because I think PHR essentially should belong to the patient, which is everybody here in this room, and not with the provider.
The word ownership, I think, is quite overloaded in this context. Do you mind if we are not yet at the point in the US and probably worldwide where people take control of their own health. They wait until it's too late. And so there's still a bit of a debate about who should be the driver in the patient-provider experience. I think in the long run, patients should have complete ownership over who has access to their records and who they're referring who they're relying on to refer themselves to another physician. So, and they should be able to take that chart with them. EMR companies like Practice Fusion, we specifically see ourselves as stewards of the data. We happen to retain rights to do things with the anonymized version of that data, but we don't consider that ownership. Our physicians, if you were to ask them directly, would say absolutely 100% I own this data. And that's because traditionally they've owned the wall of paper charts and the patient had no access to it, so there's this incumbency that they are the owners. I think we need to break away from that model a bit, but it's really just a thought exercise, because ownership can mean all kinds of different things. I think access to the information and control over who sees it and what they're using it for should definitely be in the patient's hands. The provider should know that it's their responsibility to track and maintain that record. Otherwise, if they don't feel that, if they're not empowered, the whole system kind of falls apart. So that's sort of my long way of saying it depends what you mean by ownership.
Yeah, ownership is a loaded term, and when I was at WebMD, we ended up getting a dispute with a company called IMS, one of the largest sellers of data to pharmaceutical companies, and one of the lines is, whoever owns the data today owns it in the future. But I would agree with your comment that the providers perceive today that they own it, and one of the nice parts about meaningful use is it does clarify that no, the patients have rights, and they are going to be able to view, download, and/or transmit the data, which makes it theirs. And so there's arguments. We've had providers that have point blank said, I'm not implementing your system because the patient can download a copy of my data, and I don't want them to get access to my data. Well, and we've said, okay, you don't have to use our system. Don't use our system, because we're not turning that off. We very much believe that it's the patient's data, and we can't do the job unless we. So the government's cleared that issue up largely with the meaningful use requirements. Now, meaningful use only applies to providers that see Medicare or Medicaid patients. So there's still the pediatricians and/or people that have opted out, and those docs can do whatever they want. But most of them, the issue is largely behind us now, where the data is being liberated.
And we can all help by only going to see doctors that are using EMRs. I tell people that if you're seeing a doctor who's still on paper, you should fire that doctor and go with the digital doctor. Any doctor who's still on paper is putting your life in danger. And that's not overstating it.
Please give a big round of applause. And we have another 10 minutes. If you have any other questions that you didn't get to ask, feel free to come on over and speak to them one-on-one. Thanks.
Thank you.